Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, diehards, wherever you are in the world. We are honored today to have with us the great Tim Rohr, and he is an old friend, actually probably past 50, but but an old friend anyway. And he's written a book on selling because he was sales, he is sales, and he teaches sales. And your job now, not like regular sales, not like, the sharp angle close. I'm talking about the emotional side of sales and the softer side of sales, which includes getting advice from people and actually taking the advice. So I'm going to ask Tim a bunch of things about his book, which is Sales Lessons, from the World's Greatest Mentor. And I want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to buy the book on Amazon. Not that hard to do, but in the chat, we'll have a note in there in the chat about where you can go and get the book. But in the meantime, Tim, welcome to Sell or Die.
Thank you. It is great to be here, Jeffrey. I've been looking forward to this for 2 months now because we booked it out that far in advance, and the day has finally come.
I must say that, and just for the audience, I knew Tim when he had black hair.
It's true. Well, I knew Jeffrey when he had hair.
That's true. That's also true. Today, as you can tell by if you're listening, you won't be able to see this, but if you're watching, I'm wearing my Eagles jersey because we are now 2-0, even though we tried to give the game away at least 5 times for the past 2 weeks, and no one would.
Yes. Lucky to survive last night's game against the Vikings.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, we made great plays, but we didn't own the game. They owned the game. And I just talked to my really good buddy, Harvey McKay, who was like swearing up and down because he's from Minneapolis. We couldn't. I had to listen to like a 2-minute rant. I go, Harvey, 0-2.
Well, they did have some unfortunate turnovers, especially that Justin Jefferson catch that should have been a touchdown, but he fumbled it into the end zone.
That was classic. That was the game right there.
Yes.
And literally, that was the game. Anyway, so tell me about how you decided on the title for your book.
Oh, well, so originally about a dozen years ago, I called my mentor, Dick Harlow, up and I said, "Hey, Dick, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to call it Sales Lessons of Dick Harlow." And he says, I hope you won't do that. And I said, I said, "Why not?" And he says, "I work for a company that they probably wouldn't really like that." And I said, "You probably work for the wrong company if they don't want you celebrated in a book." So he didn't want me to write the book a dozen years ago. And so I set the project aside and I did all kinds of other things. I went back to school and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in leadership from Northeastern University. And I decided I also was going to become a nationally ranked pickleball player for my age group. And I went out on the very first day and tore the fascia on the bottom of my left foot. And that ended my pickleball career before it started.
That's a blessing in disguise.
Is it? So then I had this free time because I wasn't going to school anymore and I wasn't playing pickleball anymore. And so I decided I was going to write the book. And so I called Dick up and I said, "I'm going to write the book, but I'm going to call it Sales Lessons of the World's Greatest Mentor, because frankly, nobody knows who you are yet. And I don't think they would buy a book called The Sales Lessons of Dick Harlow." And he says, "Great, go ahead and do it. I'm looking forward to reading it."
Cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
So there's at some point, and this is a pretty interesting question because I coach a lot of people that write books. At some point, there was that trigger that's first put the thing in your mind that I'm going to write the book and I'm going to feature this guy's lessons that have really helped me. Correct?
Yes.
And were there 2 or 3 that really, like, they're the outstanding ones that really lit the fire in your butt to be able to go write this?
Yeah. So a long time ago, back in the early 90s, when you were writing an article for the Charlotte Business Chronicle, they would occasionally allow guest writers to send in columns. And I sent in a couple of columns and I got published in there. And that was so exciting to me that I decided that I was a writer, and I started writing a blog, and I called it Sales Loudmouth. And I wrote 100 and something articles, and then I just didn't have anything more to say, and I stopped writing. Uh, Other people just keep on writing, even though they have nothing more to say, but I just stopped.
Yeah. I write
And
every day.
yeah, I know you do. So anyway, so I went back through these articles and I realized that I'd written about Dick several times. And I said, wait a minute. I said, I've written probably a dozen articles that featured the lessons I learned from Dick Harlow. So why not use these as the basis for the book? And so then I did, and I sort of put them in some sort of chronological order, the order that you might learn your lessons as a rookie salesperson.
Yeah.
And then I had to add some additional lessons in there, and then I had to add some color, and it started to come together. And after I got to about 30,000 words, I said, I think I can do this, and I kept going. And I think it turned out pretty good. I hope people like it. It's fun, easy to read.
Tell me about Dick Harlow.
So Dick Harlow is the world's greatest mentor to me because he's an empathetic listener who helps you grow and helps you learn. He allows you to make mistakes. He is even-keeled, right? But he's passionate about what he does. He's just a unique combination that really makes him a great coach. And I was very lucky that I ran into him when I first started in the radio advertising sales.
And do you feel like you've emulated some of those qualities in your process?
I do feel like I have emulated some, but I'm a little bit less patient than Dick. And so I'm not always as good a coach as him. But I think I've studied it more than he did. He's just sort of a natural coach, it just comes easily to him. And I've read all kinds of books on coaching and leadership and mentoring, and I've had to incorporate those things into my practice. And I've had to really think hard about what it is I'm trying to get other people to do and to learn. And I just think for Dick and for other coaches, it just comes more easily. So I'm a student of the game, and he's sort of a natural.
Give me a couple of examples of lessons that you have in the book.
All right. So one of my favorite lessons is the one featuring you. I went to a Brian Tracy seminar. Me and the whole sales team at Magic 96 Radio went down. We went to Uptown Charlotte. You remember when they changed the name from downtown to Uptown?
Exactly. Yeah.
So we went to Uptown Charlotte, and we went to this Brian Tracy seminar, and I saw you there, and I thought, Jeffrey, what are you doing here? And you said, this is what I want to do, and I got to learn from the best. I said, okay, cool. And so I'm sitting in the audience, and I'm not paying attention to what Brian Tracy's saying because I'm too busy counting the number of people that are there and thinking, how much money is this guy making?
Right, exactly.
Right. And so I started to do the math. I'm like, holy cow. And I'm thinking, radio stations don't do a great job of monetizing their listeners for their own benefit. They monetize their listeners for the advertiser's benefit, right? And then you just charge the advertiser a fee for access. So I thought, well, why can't the radio station just get the money directly from the consumer, from the listener? So I went back to the station. I said, Dick, we got to put on a seminar. We got to get some high profile speakers to come, and we do the advertising, and maybe we team up with the Charlotte Business Chronicle, and we sell the tickets and we keep all the money. And he's like, well, who would you get? And I said, we get Ken Blanchard and we get Harvey McKay. And he said, how are you going to get those guys? I said, they do this for a living. I said, our money's as good as anybody else's. I just got to find them. Right. This was pre-internet days. So I had to go get one of the books and find out who published it and make some phone calls. But eventually got it all worked out and rented Ovens Auditorium. I don't even know if that's still a place there in Charlotte.
Yep, it is.
And we started selling tickets and immediately ran into all kinds of problems that we did not anticipate. People would call up and they say, well, what's Ken Blanchard going to talk about? I said, what's Ken Blanchard going to talk about? He's the preeminent author about sales leadership. He's going to talk about that. People are like, yeah, but what's he going to say? What? Like, have you ever read The 1 Minute Manager or any of his books? He's going to talk about that. And they go, all right, well, are there going to be any takeaways. I'm like, what? And I'm like, like pamphlets or handouts or I don't know. I never did this before, right? And then people are like, what's Harvey McKay going to talk about? I said, he's going to talk about sales. He's going to talk about how you always have to be number two to somebody's number one in case something happens to number one. I said, haven't you read Swim with the Sharks? I mean, come on. What's Harvey McKay going to talk about? So it was not as easy as I thought it was going to be. And ultimately we ended up selling like 300 tickets and 2,400 is like the capacity of that place or something. And it was very embarrassing when Ken Blanchard took to the mic and he invited everybody to come down a little closer and fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to die. But the reason this story is partly
I
about
remember
you.
that so clearly.
Yes, because you were there, because you called me up and said, hey, can I introduce the speakers? And I'm like, sure, whatever, because somebody may as well get something out of this because I'm probably going to get fired. So you came and introduced the speakers, but I introduced you, which was very cool. So I remember that distinctly. You told me the things to say. You wanted me to mention you were a college dropout. And I think at that time you were just starting to become king of sales. So I think you may have only been the prince of sales.
I was kind of a nobody. I was, the world creates a lot of millionaires. At the time, I think I was a thousandaire. But this was my challenge. I introduced Harvey that day.
Yep.
And we have remained friends for the past 30 years.
That's crazy.
He's been like my dad. And he said, don't say that. Say I'm your brother. Okay, fine.
He's not that much older than you, right? Maybe 10 years old.
He's he's 13 years older than I am.
Okay. Right.
But he just had his 90th birthday.
Wow.
And Blanchard was there. He took 300 people to the Elton John concert.
Oh my goodness.
300 people.
That's awesome.
And there was a lot of celebrities there, but when I was in the audience, I realized that was Elton John's final tour. I saw Elton John on his first tour 50 years before.
Wow.
So it was like my whole musical life came together in that audience. But
that's
Harvey
amazing.
He's one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. He's been nothing but nice to me my whole career. And we talk. I hung up from him before my interview with you.
He was great that day, and Ken was great that day. I think the highlight for me was having lunch with those guys, right? Just thinking, look where I am, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, incredible. But then a couple of days later, I got called into Dick's office, and I honestly thought I was going to be fired. And Dick gave me this little speech about this promotion that had gone horribly wrong at his station in Greensboro, where they ended up giving away like 3 times as much money as they had budgeted in this contest they did at the mall. And he said, in the end, we did go over budget on that. He said, but we got a lot of good publicity out of it. And we ended up with a lot more advertisers signing up than we otherwise would have. He said, so there was a silver lining. And I said, why are you telling me all this, Dick? And he said, I'm telling you this because projects fail and people learn. And I said, whoa, thank you. And he said, get out of here. Yeah. So that's the title of that lesson in the book. One of my favorites.
When something like that happens to you, it gives you incredible inspiration. You're grateful.
Yes.
You've been humble as low as you can go. But the inspiration that sits inside of you as a result of that never goes away.
I agree. Yeah. And it gave me the opportunity to teach that same lesson to other people in the future when they took big swings and they failed, under my watch. I had to take responsibility for the money that they lost when they took a big swing. And I tell them the same thing. Hey, we're going to learn from this and do better. Carry on.
So that was 30 years ago, or close to it.
Yeah, it was 1993.
Yeah. And I stayed friends with Ken Blanchard. I stayed friends with Harvey McKay. Ken Blanchard endorsed my book, The Sales Bible. Harvey McKay endorsed my book, The Customer Satisfaction is Worthless. And um, you know, that was, you never know where things are going to go to or grow to. And when
Absolutely.
you're looking at this episode, look what it did for me, as opposed to you looked at it as a dismal failure. I looked at it, to me, as like, it was one of the coolest things that ever happened to me.
I launched your
It was
career
a
with my
turning point.
failure.
You did, literally. When, it's funny, on that Brian Tracy seminar, if you remember, the first presenter was Zig Ziglar,
Oh, I don't remember that, but that's
and then Brian
pretty
Tracy,
awesome for an opener.
yeah, and Brian Tracy was second. And somebody walked out of the audience and recognized me and looked at me and said, "You were not as good as the first guy, but you're better than the second guy."
That's high praise because Brian Tracy
And
was
that
pretty
just,
good.
it's stuck with me literally forever.
Oh man. Well, Zig Ziglar was tough to beat, man. He had a certain charisma in front of a
Yeah.
crowd that's just really tough to replicate. Hey, but something really cool happened to me. I sent my book to Ken Blanchard. He lives here in San Diego.
Yeah.
I sent my book to him, and I put a sticky note in the chapter, about him and you and Harvey. And he called me, just called me out of the blue, said, "Is this the famous Tim Rohr?" And I said, "Well, not yet." And
Oh, cool.
he said, "This is Ken Blanchard." And I about fell out of my chair.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah. He's a very nice guy. He turned very religious, but he's a very nice guy.
Yeah. Super
And
guy.
he's more than happy to help another writer. Yeah, I define a difference between a writer and an author. Authors don't always write their own books.
That's what I
Writers
found
do.
out. One of the questions that I get pretty frequently from interviewers is, "Did you write your book?" And I'm like, Excuse me, like who else would have written it?" They said, "There's ghostwriters out there who could have written your book." I said, "No, I'm a writer. I write my own stuff."
Exactly. And you can also put I'm a writer, comma, and authentic.
There you go.
I think that's a real important part of writing, because you're talking about lessons that you learned, not lessons that you heard about.
Right. Yeah. I lived through
All
these.
the, all the stories are firsthand.
Yep. I've got the scars to prove it.
Exactly. And when you start to lose your hair, you realize that there's a reason.
Yes, it's not just age.
And no, oh no, there's anxiety that goes with that. So tell me about another lesson.
All right. So I was off to a pretty fast start my first year. I was calling on a lot of people that other salespeople had given up on. And so I was talking to people who had purchased Magic 96 radio before, but for whatever reason had fallen through. And so I was doing pretty well. But then when I worked my way through all those, I really entered into this sophomore slump. And I was getting very frustrated. I wasn't selling stuff. I was not really always getting appointments. And I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So I was looking for Dick, and I was looking for some guidance. And Dick wasn't around. I mean, he was there, but he wasn't returning my voicemails. His door was always closed when I went by. I was getting pretty frustrated with Dick. And then one day I'm walking in to Magic 96. We had these stairs that you had to climb to get into our radio station. And he's coming down the stairs with Tommy Glover, who's another salesperson on our team. And I said, "Hey, Dick." And he says, "Hey, Timmy." And by the way, Dick was only the second adult male I ever let call me Timmy. The first was my father. I really couldn't do anything about that.
I got it.
For whatever reason, it was okay when Dick did it.
Yeah.
So he says, "Hey, Timmy, I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I've been really busy." And I said, "Yeah, well, Dick, things aren't going that great." And he said, "Well, I know, but I've got a lot of responsibilities. I've got the whole sales team, I've got the promotions team, I've got the programming team, I got to run the whole radio station. I can't always just be there for you." And I said, "Well, that's not so great, Dick, because things are not going well." Well, Dick was not too impressed with my insolence, right? But I kind of doubled down on it, saying, "You're just not there for me, Dick." Oof. He did not like that, right? He got this scowl on his face. But then he recovered. He says, "Tommy, why don't you go get the car?" So Tommy leaves. He says, Timmy, did you watch the Olympics this summer? This was 1992, Summer Olympics. And I said, yeah, sure. I watched the Olympics. He said, did you watch the kayaking event? They make this giant concrete river and then they put these boulders in it. Then they hang flags over the top of this river. Then they shoot hundreds of thousands of gallons of water to create this turbulence, right? In these rapids. And then these guys get in there with their kayaks and they have to go downstream. They have to turn around and go upstream. They got to go through these flags. He says, inevitably, one of them flips over. And while you're watching, you know he's going to die because nobody can jump in there to save him because they can't jump into this raging river. You can't just stop the water. So this guy's upside down in the raging river, probably banging his head on the boulders, and he's going to die right there on national TV. And then while you're watching, he flips his kayak right side up and resumes the race. That's what you have to do in sales. It is an individual sport, Tim. And while I am here to help you and coach you, I'm doing it from the sidelines, watching you in a raging river of boulders and rapids. And there's nothing much I can do if your kayak flips upside down, except to hope that I've trained you well enough that you can write your own kayak. And just then Tommy pulls up in his Mustang and Dick jumps in and drives away.
Totally cool. I guarantee you that you can never look at a kayak the same way again.
That was a really hard lesson to learn, Jeffrey. I'll tell you that. But I started, after a couple of hours of being depressed about it, I started thinking, well, what can I do, to write my own kayak? And the first thing I thought of was I probably should have been paying more attention at that Brian Tracy seminar. Instead of counting the money, I should have been listening to what he was saying. So I went to the library and I got his book, The Psychology of Selling. And I dedicated myself to reading another book, once a month from then on to try to figure out this sales game.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people complain that they're not making any sales, but don't do anything about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing about sales is it's on you, and if that's not the kind of business you want to be in, then you need to get out of sales.
I did a seminar in Trinidad and one of the guys from the audience, I said, what's the secret of selling? And he said, fish don't just jump in the boat.
It's a good point, really.
Classic. If you don't have all the gear, if you're not, if you don't know where the fish are, you got a problem.
I always say that everybody looks good riding a bicycle downhill.
Yeah.
What separates the riders is the climbing.
I used to jog until I realized that jogging doesn't help you live longer. It just seems longer.
That's for sure. And it hurts your knees.
But there was a slight incline on one of the streets that I would jog up in the morning, and Kenilworth Avenue, and I refer to it as Mount Kenilworth.
It's pretty flat.
It is. It was flat as hell, but when you're jogging, you see every incline on the planet.
Yes.
It becomes, you have to work twice as hard to get up that slight incline.
Yes.
But you never feel bad when you're taking a shower when you're done the run, ever.
I know. That's the best part.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to put on your sneakers. It's hard to go outside. It's hard to turn left or right. But you always feel great when it's over. Always. As a salesperson, I was a cold caller in the very beginning in Manhattan. And if you've never cold called in Manhattan, you really have no claim to fame as a salesperson because up yours is a greeting and everybody wants a bribe. But you were smart enough to stay a student the entire time. And I think that salespeople, diehard, we're talking to you right now. What are you reading, and how is that impacting your thinking? And what are you reading, and how is that impacting your actions? What are you doing when you're done the book? And Tim is giving you a very valuable lesson from the people that he literally learned how to succeed from, and he succeeded well. But he succeeded well because he listened and then did, not just listened and said, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a real important part of this whole process. These are lessons from his mentor that drove his revenue and drove his success and drove his fulfillment literally to a point where he could write a book about it. What was the process like in writing? What did you have to do on an everyday basis?
I'm gonna answer that question, but I was just thinking while you were saying that one of my favorite days in Charlotte was the day you invited me to your office and showed me your collection of sales books, which many people probably don't realize this, but you've got this huge collection of sales books that goes back all the way into the early 1900s. And it was
Yep.
so fun to pull one off the shelf and read what they were talking about back in 1920. And it's the same stuff we're talking about in
Oh yeah.
2020.
The language might be slightly different, but it's all about building a relationship, telling the truth, and making a connection that's, somehow emotionally based.
Yes. So back to the answer to the question. So I would usually retire to my office here after dinner, and I would write for maybe a couple of hours every night, maybe 4 or 5 nights a week. And after I got 3 or 4 lessons, or stories down on paper, I would then spend the next week going back and rewriting them. And you've done lots and lots and lots of writing, way more than me. And the old expression, writing is rewriting. And that is just true.
Yeah, one of the secrets that I came upon pretty much on accident, actually, I'll give you two. One is I let anything I write sit for a day and then go back to it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to throw it away and say this is crappy. I'm going to fix it in a way where I'm satisfied with it. And then in order to make sure the grammar's correct, I read it aloud to myself.
Okay.
And by reading it aloud, that shows me every flaw. It shows me where my sentences dangle. It shows me where my commas need to be. It shows me everything I need to know about that particular piece. And it's so unknown that I almost feel like it's a deep, dark secret. But if you write something, and you're diehard, if you write something, just read it aloud when you're done, see how it sounds. If it sounds like shit, it probably is.
So it took me about 6 months to write it all and about another month to edit it all. And I had a lot of it written, from prior years, from the blog.
From the blog, yeah.
And from columns that I'd written. But the process of rewriting it really was lengthy. And it's amazing how much editing you have to do, after the fact. You say something and then you realize 40 pages later you said something that disagrees with that thing you said, and you're like, how did that happen?
Believe me. You have to develop your philosophy before you write the book.
Yeah. I think you also have to have a voice. You have to decide what is going to be the voice of the book, and for me, it was this young sort of know-it-all student of sales going through his journey. And so that's the sort of the voice, the tone of the book. There's plenty of times when I'm snarky in the book, and I my oldest son read the book and he said, it seems like in every chapter something terrible happens to you. I said, that's because something terrible is always happening to me.
No, I think what you're doing subconsciously is explaining what happened and then what you learned from it.
Yes.
You're Aesop. Here's the story, and here's what happened at the end. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you didn't die at the end of the episode. You learned at the end of the episode, and that got you to the next episode.
Yes.
But you were smart enough, and this, I think, is important for you to understand, diehard. If you're listening to this, you can't gripe about what happens. You look in a barn full of horse shit. You look for the pony because he's there somewhere. And what Tim has done is taken his hard lessons and showing you the emotional side of it and the recovery. And once you understand that, you can way better understand sales. You want to do one more?
Yeah, I'd love to do one more.
Go for it.
So I was complaining to Dick about how terribly things were going for me. And he says, well, it sounds like you're having good meetings, but you're just not getting them over the finish line. Why don't we go out together? And, you can show me what's going on and I can meet these people. And, maybe I can ask a couple of questions and let's see what's happening. I said, okay, sure. So we jumped into his new BMW 5 Series that he had just bought, but that he did not have time to learn how the technology worked because he was in a big rush to just take delivery of that car. So we're driving down to South Carolina, which is not far from Charlotte for those people who are not familiar with the geography. It's just part of the Charlotte DMA. And we're driving down there and we cross over this creek. We suddenly get hit by a dozen giant moths just smashing into his windshield. And Dick tries to push the button at the end of the wiper wand to spray the water onto the windshield. And it wasn't working. And he had to pull off the side of the road and complain about the car. And I said, well, there's no button at the end of that wand. That's not how it works. And he eventually figured it out, right? And he spread moth guts all over his windshield. And we got down to the place that we were going to first, which was a marina, a boat sales place, essentially. And I had been meeting with this guy, the general manager, several times, and he always seemed interested in Magic 96 and about marketing and stuff, but he'd never committed to buying anything. And he came out to meet us and he says, why don't you guys come back to my office and we'll have a chat. And before we went anywhere, Dick said, hey, can you tell me about this boat? What is this, a Bayliner? And I rolled my eyes like this, like, Dick, if you had questions about boats, I could have told you all about the boats, the Bayliners and the Mastercrafts and the Sea Rays that this guy sells. I've read everything there is to know about these boats. I could have given you chapter and verse. I can't believe you're wasting this guy's time with questions about a Bayliner. I didn't say any of that. That's what I was thinking. But this guy lit up, like a TV screen coming to life when Dick asked about the Bayliner. And this guy's like, oh, this is a Bayliner. This is the best family boat we sell, for people who can afford a $20,000 to $30,000 boat and want to take their kids out on the lake. I mean, this is the boat. Take a look at this. And the guy starts showing us the boat. Dick is asking questions about the boat. Who's the kind of person who might buy this boat? And he's describing the person who would buy the boat. And eventually we end up in his office. And now he's the most animated I've ever seen him. I could barely get 5 words out of this guy. He's kind of like a lumberjack. He's like 6'4", 240. He wears a flannel shirt. I think he's out back chopping wood in between customer visits. And he's always, quiet with me. But with Dick, he's just jibber jabbering. And in the end, he says, I like your radio station. And Tim's been great at explaining it all to me. If we could do co-op with our Bayliner funds, we'd be happy to buy $5,000 advertising in the month of May. Like, holy shit, sold, right? So then we go to the next place, the Pasta Cafe on Independence Boulevard, and sort of the same thing happens. And then we go to Stereo Sound across the street, and sort of the same thing happens. And we get back at the end of the day, and we go to conference room A, and Dick says, what'd you learn today? And I said, you're some sort of a wizard, is what I learned. And he says, no magic at all. He said, people want to talk about their business. You just have to let them. He says, you've been talking about our business. They know everything about our radio station. He said, they want to talk about their business. And after they talk about their business, they're going to be like, we should do business together. He said, that's all. He said, I just crossed the T's and dotted some I's for you. You did all the heavy lifting. And I said, okay, great. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to start having these conversations with people. He says, take it easy. Take it easy. He said, you have to let things come to you. He said, you can't force it, which was hard for me because when somebody told me that there was a way to do something, I wanted to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, you're a driver. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So that was really a great lesson, which was, the lesson was, hey, you got to let it happen. You got to let the game come to you. You got to let people open up to you. You got to give them a chance to talk about their business.
Think about the times that it happened and when you did it the right way, how easy it was to make that sale.
It's like magic.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Tim Rohr, if you look in the upper right-hand side of the screen, if you're watching, his book is Sales Lessons of the World's Greatest Mentor. Is it of or from?
It's of, and there's a poster of it right there. A lot of times people ask me if that's the actual size of the book. No, it is not. The actual size of the book is normal sized. I've got one right here. Normal
Hold up
size,
book.
normal size book. There it
Perfect.
is. So yeah, you can get that on Amazon, or if you want to buy more than 5, you can contact me, go to timjmrohrer.com and just send me an email or something.
I'm going to tell you that every salesperson who's listening, and we have a lot of them, can take great lessons from our talk today. And I appreciate our reunion, but I appreciate your lessons. You have
Thank you.
Done a great job in capturing the wisdom that you yourself put into action and made a success out of it. So diehard, if you're out there and you're impatient, I'm telling you right now, grow some patience, because if you don't, you're going to grow bankrupt. and that's the best we can do today. I'm challenging you, get out there and sell something, even if your ass falls off. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.